Kailash, thanks so much for joining us today. Although you need no introduction for those who may have missed who you are, everyone, this is Kailash Nadh. He is the Chief Technology Officer at Zerodha. Kailash has over 2 decades of experience in coding himself, and I must say, for somebody who's interacted with him in the past and I follow closely, has a very, very different and refreshing take on building out technologies. Kailash, welcome to TuneIn, and thank you so much for taking our time to do this today.
Thank you, Jyotsna.
So I must tell you, as technology lawyers, it feels like really, really exciting times. There's just so much happening on the technology and policy front. And what we are seeing is a very strong pattern of change that is focusing on users becoming central to some of the considerations that policy as well as technology regulation are taking. So I guess I can dive right in, and we can start with perhaps privacy by design. So Kailash, as a platform that's a custodian of vast amounts of personal information, what does privacy by design really mean? And of course, what are the benefits of incorporating this at a design level itself when you're developing consumer products?
Typically, when we say privacy by design, it refers to two things. One's the philosophical approach with which a product is built, and the other side would be the technical measures that one takes to protect privacy, user privacy, data privacy. So the interesting thing here is, as a business, we've taken measures to ensure that principles of privacy are embedded right in the product, right in the way we do business. We've taken a stance that we will not mine or profile user data. We will not use that data to sell additional services to our users. We don't send push notifications. We don't send marketing emails. So that's the philosophical side of it. And behind the scene, we are a large financial organization. Say we have a large customer support team, we have compliance teams, legal teams, account opening teams, who all need access to customer data to fulfill specific roles. Now that's where the technical measures kick in. We've designed our backend systems in such a way that even our own employees, our own staff, they only get the absolute minimum data required for them to fulfill a certain action. And then, of course, there are technicalities, how you store data, how you encrypt data, etc., etc. So that's the technical side of it. But at the same time, we are beholden to the regulators, and regulators mandate that we share data with multiple large other regulated entities. So it's interesting. Customer data from our systems, they flow to stock exchanges, to the regulator itself, to the depositories. That nuance is typically not really talked about. And privacy typically again refers to practices that a business employs. And I would say more than technical considerations, the philosophical considerations are what really shine outwards.
So I think that's a great point, right? If you look at the new law that we have on privacy, which is our Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the evolution that it took was from a very, very prescriptive law with, lots of compliances sort of embedded into the statute to now more of a principles-based regulation, which is why it comes to this whole point on striking that balance between keeping privacy and minimization at the core of what you're building out, but at the same time ensuring that you are enriching user experience. Because, I must admit, a lot of the convenience that I see as a consumer of several applications is also because of how much they know about me. So where does one really sort of strike the balance?
So can you balance? Absolutely. So I think this whole notion that you need massive amounts of data to provide quality services, it's not true. And I would like to cite us as a use case or an example for that. I would personally argue that with minimal data that you collect, it's possible to provide high quality business services and high quality products. But there's always that sense, we will use this someday, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So that FOMO also keeps organizations away from data minimization practices. So yes, there is a legitimate use case for storing data, but this whole notion that you need massive amounts of data to provide quality services, I don't think that has any scientific backing.
So just sort of moving away from the concept of privacy and data protection, there's also, with regulations on consumer protection, e-commerce, as well as dark patterns, a very conscious effort to put more decision-making power at the user's hands, right? So how have you sort of, reacted to these regulations?
This particular draft, when we saw it for the first time, the one on dark patterns, I was quite surprised and pleasantly and positively surprised. These dark patterns not only mislead people into often financial loss, making the wrong kind of choices, but it also takes control away. If you can't wipe your data, if you can't get rid of a subscription that is literally taking your agency away. But this new framework clearly draws certain boundaries on what is a positive practice and what's a negative practice. So I think it's great. Now, how exactly it will get implemented or whether it will have unintentional ambiguities, etc., that remains to be seen.
But I'm just sort of playing, devil's advocate here. The reason why some of these practices are adopted is because there is obvious sort of benefits with customer stickiness. It does help to a certain degree to be able to know your customer and personalize. So just again, as someone who is building these out and constantly sort of re-innovating, is it possible to achieve the same outcomes in a different manner? Because I guess that is the resistance to a lot of these regulations, the fact that you have to change everything that you're doing.
It's a philosophical call. If an organization's, if a business's way of retaining stickiness is making cancellations and disconnections impossible, I wouldn't even call that, good business. So if you purely look at the metrics, yes, customers haven't left, but that's because you've made it impossible for them to leave. You don't have to make a customer's life difficult to provide good services to them. So maybe this will force people to provide better services so that customers stick rather than making, leaving impossible.
So Kailash, I'm going to, move away from what we've been discussing now on user-centric regulation and what technology policy and regulation is moving towards to a little bit more on the community and the technology side, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about free and open source software, purely coming from a commercial perspective and as an organization that is largely built on free and open source software. What do you think, and what was your thinking on sort of going down this path, whilst sort of keeping in mind that maintaining your competitive advantage is of course key, contributing to the ecosystem is also a great responsibility. So how do you sort of weigh all of these things together when you're looking at building out something that is in fact free and open source?
Pretty much the entire technology world runs on free and open source software. The browsers that we use, internet infrastructure, software infrastructure that underlies the internet, all the services that governments are building out, they all use open source components underneath it. So whether that affects competitive advantage, now that question has become narrow, because you pick 10 fintech players, so-called fintech players, I'm pretty sure all 10 of them would be using the same underlying open source database for storing data. So it's commodity software, and there's no competitive edge that one can gain. Everybody uses the best database. Everybody uses the best web framework. So the advantage is in really how well you compose all of this together and deliver services to end users. Now, whether an organization themselves produce open source software, that's a different question.
Right.
Bulk of the open source usage in the world is consumption, and very few companies, in fact, contribute back to the community, contribute back to the projects they themselves use. Right. So there's a huge disparity, and that has to be addressed. And whether contributing back to open source disadvantages you, I don't think so. Because the entire infrastructure, entire empires are today built on open source foundations. So it's basically that. The competitive edge is in delivering quality products and services, no longer on the components that you use inside.
But just, so that we also talk about the cons a little bit, do you think that in relying on open source software, is there any sort of security vulnerability that would be different from using something that's proprietary, or is that not a consideration? And the reason I ask again is because, again, sort of going back to a lawyer that works in this space, a lot of the reason why we have such heavy data regulation, and we're seeing it happen even sectorally as well, is because of the focus on cybersecurity risks and vulnerabilities.
If there is complex software, there are bugs. That's the very nature of software. So open source software will have bugs, proprietary software will have bugs. Now the big difference is how these bugs are discovered and how quickly they are addressed. If it's proprietary black box software, you have no access to the source code. There's nothing you can do. You just have to take the vendor's word for it. They don't fix it, you're stuck. If they tell you that it's fixed, you just have to believe it. There's literally no proof. It's a black box. But the great thing about open source software is that it is built in the open. The source code is out there, and there are countless eyeballs looking at it. Issues are discovered much more quickly. Issues are fixed much more quickly because you don't just have a proprietary desk of 10 or 20 people working on it. You have the whole globe looking at it, suggesting patches, fixes, etc. So from a security perspective, I would always pick open source software because of these reasons. And These are not ideological reasons. It's the very physical, tangible nature of open source software.
I think that's really refreshing because I'm no technologist, but I think that there is generally some sort of misconception that just because something that is accessible to everybody means it comes with that sort of exposure, which is not necessarily the case. And I think what I sort of took away from what you said, it's essentially the community building for the community. So Kailash, I think we have actually successfully been able to pack in fairly nuanced themes in a very short time frame. So thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with me. I don't think I would have been able to do this with anybody else as succinctly. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. It was a nice chat. Thank you.